And one of the phrases I use a lot is breathe and everything changes. Like notice when you're not breathing. And breathing is, I mean, we get breathed every day. We don't have to work on it, but conscious, deliberate breathing practice is one of the ways that you can go into your body. And so when you start doing it on a daily basis, like before I get up every morning, I take 5 deep breaths and I say 3 thank yous. That's my gratitude practice. And it doesn't matter what state I'm in, that's my gratitude practice. Thank you, thank you, thank you. 5 deep breaths. And then I do my realignment practice. What's going on in my body right now? What's calling my attention? And how can I love that part of myself, even if it's pain? Because remember, pain times resistance equals suffering. So here's the word of advice for your listeners. Pain times freedom. Pain times presence equals freedom. We all have pain in our past. Can we bring loving presence to this moment? Wrap the past with gratitude for whatever you have learned from it, and then be able to create a future that is so much brighter, lighter, joy-filled, not just for you, but for everybody that you get to be around.
Between you and me, right where you are right in this moment, is exactly where you were meant to be. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. Welcome to the Jorgasmic Life Podcast. I am your hostess, Elena Harder, and I am so glad to have you here today. If you are an awakening woman, a conscious mother, a woman on a journey to bring about the best for your family and create an enlightened experience of being a child and a woman and a mother and partner in your world, I absolutely I'm so grateful and so glad that you have found your way here. This podcast collects not only my own personal stories, things I would have done better had I known better, but also the beautiful stories of many hundreds of other women and men who have been through the consciousness awakening journey, who are here to share their stories, to inspire you to know that you can recover from mental health challenges, from postpartum depression, from challenges with traumatic births, and just the life in 21st century, as well as beautiful, actionable tips, exercises where we walk you through practical things that have really helped us, and the journey of becoming a joygasmic mother, one who handles absolutely every challenge with grace and ease and understands that everything is here to awaken her deeper, to create more empowerment and more pleasure in her life, even the challenging things. So that sounds juicy. Listen up, because we have got a wonderful episode for you today.
Fully harnessing the joygasmic potential of your body and yourself. Anything is possible, and especially we are here to tell you that deep and fulfilling love is possible and is available for you when you choose that for yourself.
Today's interview is with Diana Lockett. Diana is a visionary heart leader with a gift for awakening women to realign and create inner wealth, better health, and deeper purpose in their lives. Through her transformational coaching, she creates heart-safe, resonant communities while helping her clients to unwind their nervous systems and trust in the perfection of their lives as they return to their own authentic states of love and joy. Once they can move beyond their conditioning, their tension, and their limiting beliefs, they begin to relax into the perfection of their lives and go from a state of trying to survive to one where they can truly realign to thrive. You can find out more about Diana at her website, Diana Lockett. And as always, information and links she shares are in the show notes. The conversation with Diana today ranges over all sorts of embodiment topics. So talking about the impact of the sort of more of the juicy details of like, how exactly do we go about creating an embodiment practice? What does that look like for ourselves? What are some of the pitfalls and places we can get stuck in terms of spiritual bypass, mental bypass, and cognitive bypass of those somatic states, the body states of dealing with our emotions and reawakening to those. I share some stories about places I've gotten stuck along the way, that if I had been able to, if somebody had said, hey, watch out for this, I might have been able to move through it faster than the year or whatever I got stuck in processing my emotions that way. We talk about the hitting bottom with grief and the true meaning of joy. We talk about how her personal journey over the last year and a half with many, many losses, cracked her open to the power and the beauty of grief, and how the Buddhist and tantric philosophies really impact and support these practices. We also share about the experience of transformation and the importance of transforming our personal stories as mothers so that we can be conscious parents for our children, and so that we can stop those lines of trauma and abuse. We talk about neglect and its role and its devastating effects upon the psyche of young children. We talk about the experience of cortisol in the body as babies, and how that impacts our capacity to be peaceful adults as well. And so if you're looking for inspiration to be on your spiritual path, be more dedicated to your spiritual practices as a mom, especially a mom who's expecting, or especially, as a mom with young children, then this is absolutely the episode for you. I hope you enjoy this episode with Diana. Beautiful. Welcome, Diana, to the Jorgasmic Life podcast. I'm so glad to have you here today. And we're going to dive into a beautiful conversation about conscious parenting, shadow work, trauma, recovery, and all those beautiful things. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. One, I just adore you. And I have, from the moment I met you, I felt like this sisterhood connection. And these topics that you just mentioned, it's like, yes, 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 let's go for it. Let's talk.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we dive into any of those topics, how did you get into, doing this work and being a coach and a support person for people to find their joy and their purpose in life?
So that's a really long story, and one that I was always connected to. At the age of 33, a friend of mine her husband called me out, and he said, "Diana is an ice queen." And it was literally like a dagger to my heart. It's like, really, that's what I'm projecting into the world. Wow. So I started doing my personal development journey. I started with meditation. I became a Reiki practitioner, eventually became a yoga teacher trainer. And I realized that a lot of the teachings that I do through yoga were extremely powerful and transformative for my students to be able to open their hearts and find their way in through community to themselves. And I realized that not everybody's going to roll out a mat and do this work. And so my coaching evolved from that, where I take Eastern philosophy, particularly around the tantric traditions, Buddhist philosophy, mindset practices, and then really deep embodiment work. So I call myself a spiritual coach. Realignment coaching is my brand. And it's really deep into understanding who we are, how we react, and how we can take responsibility and change. And I really believe that the only reason that I get to do this work, and I'm so privileged that I get to do it, is because I've had immense opportunities to go deep and practice and build a relationship with my shadows, which are the disowned parts of me, build a relationship with my pain, turn my pain into art, and really be able to see the world from a perspective where life is happening for me and I get to co-create, and I'm not a victim of my circumstances.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So much in there. Oh, thank you. You just put my life philosophy into a little summary there, right? There's so much. So much in terms of owning that pain, reclaiming our shadows. I've got in this last year, I've gotten so into birth work and how we're born and how that impacts our lives, because, like you being on this journey and seeing, people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s who are needing to undo and realign and undo all of this trauma. And I go, where does all this trauma come from? It's so much of it starts in the womb, in how we're born, in how those early years happen. And, while some people feel really called to work with people who are in their older years, I go, what if we could just nip this in the bud? What if we could just stop it? What if we could just change the way that we're giving birth, change the way that babies are being conceived even, and come into a place where everybody's wanted. How many people walk around being like, am I worthy of love? Am I worthy of having what I want? And, if we were conceived in ways that were not supportive of that, or if we were accidents or mistakes, or fifth children that, mom was already overdrawn and overstressed, it makes a lot of sense that ends up being in our imprinting, and we're challenged in our lives of, are we wanted? Are we loved? Are we worthy? Because, that wasn't there in our initial imprinting. And so both sides, right? We can do restorative work and we can do preventative work.
And I think we need to do both, because the restorative work is going to lead to the preventative work. We need to be able to reach women of childbearing years and talk to them about how they can start changing. What I usually say to women, and I work primarily with women, and they are typically a little bit older, but I say to them, this was part of your experience. This was part of your history. This is your biography, but your biography doesn't have to become your biology. Your biography doesn't have to become your life narrative. You actually get to stand up today from a mature spiritual perspective and say, stop, like the buck stops here. And, you talk about trauma, birth trauma and womb trauma. And then we're also carrying around tons of generational traumas that are not even ours to own, but nobody knew. And I'm just going to say, let's forgive everybody previously, because they just didn't know. Like my mom, my dad, my grandparents, they didn't know. And so I know. So it's up to me to say no more. And so the women that I work with, they come to me and they don't necessarily identify that there's trauma and generational trauma and early childhood trauma. They don't recognize that. They just say, I don't feel happy. Something's missing in my life. I don't know what it is. Like, I've done the work. I've had the kid. I've got the house. And something's missing. And I can so relate to that, because that was me at age 32. When things started just shifting me. It's like, what's missing? I've got this perfect picture, perfect life. And then I realized, we talk about early childhood trauma. I was a twin. I was the third. My twin and I were the third and fourth child under the age of 2.5. So my parents had 4 children under the age of 2.5. And when we were born, my mother didn't even know she was expecting twins. My mother had been sedated for her delivery. It was, I guess she must have been a little bit conscious, but I was told she was unconscious. And when she woke up, there were 2 babies. And she just assumed one of the babies in the room, in the bassinet, was left over from a previous delivery. And so the trauma for her to recognize, here I have 2 toddlers at home, and now there's 2 more coming home. And so my mother didn't have support. And now let me go back a little bit. So because we were premature, my sister and I, we were left in the hospital. And the hospital was in a downtown Montreal. My parents lived in the suburbs. Dad went back to work. Mom went back to deal with the toddlers. My sister and I separated. So here's twins in the wombs, totally connected, kindred sisters and souls, separated, left in a hospital for, we think, up to 3 weeks. My parents are deceased, so I can't verify it. And no one checking in on us. No parents coming to hold us. And so I know that my first source fractured wound happened way back then, when I imagine my cries would not have been responded to. I didn't have touch. I didn't have reassurance. And that just continued through my childhood until the age of 32, where I sensed something rumbling in me, something needing to be addressed. And that's when I started doing my deep source wound healing trauma work myself. And it has shifted my life in a way that, sometimes I think, I wish I could just close that door, because I open that door and there's just a little bit more pain. Well, the reality is all healing has its time. And we're on a human journey that is also coincidentally a healing journey. And so that's just the reality. Can we change? Yes. Like the work that we get to do with women is going to change the way these little beings are brought into the world. Absolutely. I know that when my daughter has children, and my children were raised very consciously, and I intentionally use conscious parenting with them, they are going to be incredible parents because they know different. And I'm really excited to see this generation of younger people today who are extremely conscious, very conscious of who they are, very conscious of the environment, really bringing in a change in their parenting and in the world at large. And, we have no choice. We have no choice. The world has to change.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that piece of your story. And it's like, wow, and I think it's so important to point out that, at 32, 33, it arose. You no longer had a choice whether you were going to face this or not. It showed up, and here it was, loud and proud, ready for you to do that healing work. And, you I want to say you did have a choice, but usually the choice that people have is, evolve or die, evolve or suffer, evolve or, continue getting worse and worse and worse. And it's the same with me. It's like, oh, like after my 6th breakup with my ex, like, did I want to evolve or did I want to, keep going through that pattern? And it's like, absolutely not. Maybe I could have learned that lesson after the 3rd, but I wasn't quite ready. I decided I'd jump back into it. It got worse and worse and worse each time until I was like, hold up, we got to do something different and really change that. And like you said, this new generation coming in, I mean, I was born in the 80s. So there's this experience where my generation, for the most part, not everybody, but for the most part, we were raised without being beaten in school, without being beaten by our parents. Our parents' generation erased that physical violence from the sphere of what it is to be a human being on the planet, at least generally in North America, generally in obviously there's exceptions to that, and bless you if that's your journey. But from that perspective, what do I get to work on? Okay, well, the things I suffered with: emotional abuse, neglect, not feeling heard, lack of self-expression, lack of, encouragement into my journey, all of these things. Oh, woe is me, in comparison to physical abuse, maybe it's not so terrible. But if we're talking about an enlightened society, if we're talking about creating a space where people are thriving instead of surviving, all of those need to be worked through as well. And so, in my journey with my now 10-year-old and this baby coming, it's like, what can I do in terms of my personal work to make sure that I'm no longer resonating in any way, shape, or form with the internalization of those challenges, so that I can be fully present, taking care of myself, respecting myself, loving myself, putting my needs first and then other people's needs, in addition to that. Being able to maybe put my needs to the side for a little bit, but make sure they're getting met every day, that kind of thing, so that we can really create a different generation, a different reality for the world. And it's just incredible to see that happening.
Yeah. And I will say, I mean, a lot of what you experienced growing up, there's a lot of me too there. Now, I did have the spectrum of physical abuse from father and neglect from mother, to the point where my mother was unconscious on the couch from Valiums to manage her own depression and anxiety. And I will say that I feel like the impact as an adult today on my life and how I experience my life, the neglect was more impactful for me. And it shows up in my relationships, where I recognize an abandonment fear in my relationships. So if someone's not willing to show up, someone's not willing to talk with me, someone's not willing to resolve things, I feel this like, I'm not valued, I'm not important, and there's an abandonment issue that comes up. When I put on my big girl hat, I can see where that comes from. And this is why it's so important to do this work, because if we don't recognize our patterns, if we don't recognize where they come from, if we don't get to reparent ourselves and nurture ourselves, then it continues to show up in relationships. And then we like to think that we're conscious beings and we're spiritual beings and we're making better imprints in the world. And I think we are. And yet there's always going to be these sneaky pieces that come through. So you talked about needs. My program is called Realign to Thrive. And the Realign is an acronym for the R is remember who you are. You are a miracle. You're all miracles. Everybody listening right now is a miracle. Statistically, you should not be here, and yet you're here. And so it makes you nothing short of a miracle. And because you're a miracle, guess what? It means everybody else is a miracle. And so this becomes a really deep journey of forgiveness. Those who've betrayed you, those who've hurt you, those who've ignored you, those that that you've hurt. Everybody is a miracle. The E stands for explore, because there's a lot of coaches today and they do some amazing work, but it's primarily around mindset coaching. Change your thoughts, change your life. And there's beautiful value in that, but it's not enough when you're dealing with unresolved trauma and experiences that keep showing up in your life. Yeah. So again, 32, I felt this rumbling inside, like something was nagging at me. It was an embodiment experience. It was my body telling me something needed to get healed. My mind could read all the books and I could do all the talks that I was meditating. I'm not kidding, for 3 hours a day. Now, I was meditating to avoid my relationship at the time, because I could just say, don't bother me, I'm going to meditate. And I would just be in this blissful state for 3 hours. But then I'd have to leave that room eventually and confront my ex-husband. And we were not in a cooperative, collaborative place. And I would feel the tension in my body. So meditation was great to still my mind, but it didn't help me to deal with what was sitting in my body that needed to heal. So the work that I do is very much about what I call embodiment consciousness. And so the E in realign is explore the body. What is your body telling you? And then the A is to allow and acknowledge it, because when you can give language, it's like, oh, I notice my belly is like tight, or my shoulders are hunched up, or I notice my breath is shallow, or I notice my breath is expansive. When you notice in moment to moment how your body is doing, this embodiment practice starts to soften. So acknowledging what's happening in your body, the research shows within 90 seconds, your body can start to release that tension. So let's just call it all tension. Is it okay if I swear?
Yep.
All the shit of our lifetime gets stored in our body as tension. And so if we don't release that tension, it's just always in the back saying, here I am, here I am, here I am. And then we have a society of people walking around with immense anxiety and stress. And then we have something thrown on top of it. Let's just call it a pandemic. Okay, so we're all experiencing this pandemic. We're all in this storm. But the way that we have been able to navigate through our embodiment tension determines how we experience it, what boat we're in. Are we in a boat where we're in constant worry and stress? Are we in a boat where we can trust that everything is going to evolve and align as it's meant to? The tension in your body is going to determine which boat you get to go in. And the problem is people become so addicted to their tension. They're so, and I don't say this in a conscious way, they're not consciously addicted. It's what they know. It's what their body knows. So they don't know that they're tense. They don't know that they're stressed, because that's the default. And we learn stress and tension and anxiety from the imprints of our parents. Yeah. So here I have my father, who was very abusive. And what I saw, the imprint I received from him was that when life isn't going well, you explode and you harm. And then I have my mother, when life isn't going well, you shut down. So as a child and early adult, I was in a massively confused state. Well, what do I do? What do I do?
Do I explode or do I shut down? Do I explode or do I shut down? Or do both?
And it was both, right? It was both, because it just depended on the circumstance. So the realign is remember you're a miracle, explore your body, allow and acknowledge, and then let it be, because there's nothing wrong with you in that moment. You don't have to change anything. By acknowledging it, you're in your body, you're noticing what's present, and resisting what's present creates more tension. You know, blaming yourself, saying, oh, shoot, there's that tension again. I really worked hard. I meditated. Why is that still there? That's a resistance. And pain plus resistance equals suffering. Pain times presence equals freedom.
Yeah.
So we have a choice. How do we not resist? How do we embrace what's going on? And it's a practice, that coaching that I do. When we get through those 4 stages of remember, explore, acknowledge, allow, and let it be, or even love it, then there's 3 things that happen with the IGN and realign. The first is there is a message always, that when we can get into a relaxed enough stage, there's a message that the universe wants us to know. And the universe is the God of your understanding. I'm not here to preach or to teach religion. It's whatever you believe as your higher source. You can even call it your soul. Wants you to know something. So what is the inspired pop-up that comes to you? What does it want you to know about life? And when I'm coaching, I'll usually context it in something like, life wants you to know something right now. Or your trusting heart wants you to know something right now. What is that it wants you to know? And a pop-up comes and it's like, that's it. Don't filter. Don't even get curious about it, but just that, get curious and just say, wow, okay, let's sit with this. The G in realign is, what are you grateful for in this moment? Because I believe gratitude is one of the highest frequency practices that we can do. And sometimes we have to do a lot of it to be able to see what's there. And straight up. And then the N, which you mentioned, this is why I mentioned this coming full circle. The N in realign is, what do you need? What do you need to come back to this place of remembrance? What do you need to feel nourished? What do you need to feel joy? What do you need to feel content, relaxed in your life right now? And it doesn't mean that you have to change anything in your circumstances, but maybe you do. You know, I'm never the person that says, leave that relationship, change that job. I believe that there's an evolution that happens within us when we get real with ourselves, real and realign. The evolution will show itself to us. And all we need to do is get out of our way and trust. and soften. And that's what I've been doing for 2 years since we last spoke.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh, that softening journey is so big.
Yeah.
And I've just seen, like in my own life, I've seen miracles when I do the inner work and the outer world changes.
Yeah.
And I do the inner work and the outer world changes, or I do the inner work. I realize I have to have a conversation. Conversation shifts everything. It opens, it blossoms some new reality in the context of the same reality, same relationship dynamic, whatever, just like radically changes. And
Yeah.
sometimes that does mean leaving the relationship or the job or the whatever, but you know, speaking from experience, like 8 boyfriends later or whatever it was, trying to fix that internal like self-sabotage and people pleasing. It's like, well, you know, the next one doesn't actually solve that people pleasing. You know?
Yeah. It's, you know, you mentioned self-sabotage. Let me just come back to need for a moment. So most of us, especially women, are not taught how to recognize healthy needs and how to express our needs in a healthy way, because there's a part of us, especially, I'm going to say women who were brought up in the 80s, have been told that I am independent. I don't need anything. And neediness is a fault. Just like people believe that vulnerability is a fault. And in fact, when you can ask for your needs and when you can be vulnerable, you grow stronger because you're not doing it alone. Right? You can count on a community to support you. So it's so important to be able to ask for what you need. That's a critical part of being on the spiritual journey and living consciously. In terms of self-sabotage, one of the ways that I describe self-sabotage is it's not actually like your mind doesn't really want to sabotage you. What happens is at some point in your upbringing, you created defensive strategies to be able to live in the world. So if you had abusive, neglectful, whatever experiences, heartbreak, whatever it was, you did what you needed to do for survival in that moment. And so you created strategies. We call them defense mechanisms. And those defense mechanisms were here to protect you. And so I always ask people to be able to acknowledge those defensive mechanisms, whatever they are, with love. And that's the only way we can release them. So was it self-sabotage? I don't believe it was self-sabotage. I believe that there was something that needed to defend at that time because you weren't ready to step into your greatness, to step into your request for your needs, to step into your fullness, to be able to whatever. So you needed to protect until you didn't need to anymore. So, you know, remember, all healing has its time. And so everything is an opportunity for us to grow and evolve. And yet we can't push it. And I don't want people to go back and say, you know, I self-sabotaged that, I ruined that for myself, whatever. Like, that's a blame game. I don't think it's healthy. I think it's more like, wow, I really wasn't ready. I really wasn't ready to share my truth at that time. I really wasn't ready to fully love myself and to embrace the dark parts of myself, the shadows. I really wasn't ready to reclaim my wholeness at that time. So I think there's when you mention self-sabotage, it's something I work with a lot with people, that it's not, I don't think the mind literally says, I'm going to ruin this for you. I don't think that happens. I think it's truly just, we have these learned habits, these learned patterns, these defensive mechanisms, and they're there to keep us safe. Yeah. But here you are, you know, mature woman, and you get to say, yeah, thank you so much. I'm going to put you in the back seat, because I can create safety in a different way now that's probably going to be healthier in my relationships and have a better outcome that's going to be for the evolution of me, my partner, my child, and my child to be. And then eventually the world at large is going to benefit from it.
Yeah, it's interesting. You caught me saying self-sabotage. I'm like, did I say that word? It's like, you know, I got a little bit of this going on.
No, none of that, because it's a common term, right? A lot of people, especially in business, they talk a lot about self-sabotaging in business. And again, I wanted to say, like, that's what you needed at that moment. And until we recognize it, we can't create a change. I posted something yesterday. I just post these little nuggets on Facebook and Instagram. Nothing changes until something changes. It's simple, but it's true, right?
Yeah. And when we're willing to do that inner work, it goes like, oh, like, okay, so, you know, maybe externally I go, oh, I want to do this, that, and the other thing. And for whatever reason, I'm not doing this, that, and the other thing. My rational mind thinks I should be doing this, but some other part of me is driving the boat and says that we're not going to be doing that. And in NLP, they call it secondary gain. It's like, well, your primary rational thinking mind says, okay, I want this thing. But, at the baseline, it's like, oh, but I'm not safe if I'm fully on fire in my life. I'm not safe if, I'm speaking my truth. I'm not safe if. So then actually safety is a bigger need than fully expressing self. So then all of a sudden, the behavior lines up with maintaining that safety and not with the big lofty vision of who we might be or whatever's going on in the journey or how we might be parenting, right? In terms of parenting, it's like, oh, maybe it's like, well, I need to feel like I'm in control. Okay, well, in control looks like yelling because that's what was role modeled to me, or in control looks like just like pulling back and being totally absent or neglectful because that's what, hiding in my room meditating for 3 hours because that was role modeled to me. And so when we can recognize, I go, okay, well, what are some of the other ways we can create safety or control in our lives so that we can have these dreams that we have for ourselves, as well as being in a place of acknowledging and meeting all of those needs that we have under the surface that might not be as conscious. And it's as simple as asking, like, so what would you get if you had that? If you had, what are you getting from the thing you're creating? What is the benefit of the thing you're creating that you don't want? Not being rejected, not being made fun of, not having to push myself, not having to show up, whatever. I mean, those are all mine.
Receiving support. Being okay, not being okay.
Yeah.
Right? Giving yourself a little bit of permission to be perfectly imperfect. For me, safety always comes back to an embodiment practice. So, the mind can rationalize all of that, but if the body doesn't feel safe enough to be able to relax, then it's always going to intrude on the mind's capacity to see truth. Right? Because if the body's not feeling safe, what that means is that there's a low level or a high level of fight or flight happening in the body. And then the chemicals that get released from that, the hormones, cortisol, literally strengthens the part of the brain that is the fear center of the brain and shuts down the part of the brain that's our creative thinking genius part of our brain. So we have, when we recognize, I mean, in a sense, I don't really want to simplify our biology, but it's really, really simple. It's really simple. And I was coaching a woman yesterday, and she very much tries to control life. And when she can't control life, she pushes. And so I had to take her through a practice of just feeling that it's okay to be safe in her body. And when she was safe in her body, she could relax enough to see how she's showing up in the world. This was my friend's husband calling me out as an ice queen. And I went, oh my goodness. And then I went, you know what? You're right. And there's a good reason. My ice queen is one of my shadows now. It's a good reason. I had the ice queen there because she was protecting me, because the world was not safe for me growing up. The world was never safe for me. But unfortunately, it meant that it showed up in all of my relationships, and I had few friendships.
Right.
All through my growing up years. So I needed to learn how to create safety in my body so that I could start to soften and melt the ice queen so that she could show up. And when she shows up, when we feel safe, we can start to trust life. Whatever you put, like whatever word life means to you, whether it's life is a relationship, life is your work, life is your parenting, life is your own skill set, life is, that you're going to get into a car and make it from A to B. Like whatever life is, you can start trusting when you feel this sense of ease and safety in your body. But as long as we don't have that, there's always going to be a little hook waiting to get triggered. And that little hook and that little trigger could be just your kid who didn't do his homework, or it could be your partner who, made the wrong meal, or it could be traffic, or it could be, I'm in the 5th day of rain right now in Squamish, BC. It's been raining for 5 days. I was like, okay, I'm ready for some sun. I see myself getting pulled back. It's like, no, it's up to me. I can't change that. It's up to me to create the conditions within myself so that I don't get sucked down into this gloomy blue state of rain, right? So I get up and I go for a walk no matter what. I exercise, I put on a candle behind me. I've got my essential oils going, like I'm creating the conditions that make me feel really well. And I do my embodiment practices.
Let's dive a little bit more into that embodiment practices, because like you said, the nervous system it can't be in both. It's either in fight or flight, or it's in rest, digest, feed, breed, however you want to call it, right?
Yeah.
There's many things but the parasympathetic. Oh, sometimes I get them mixed up.
Sympathetic is fight or flight. Parasympathetic is relaxed.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So we want to be in that parasympathetic where life is relaxed and peaceful. But, if our mom was high cortisol, if she was stressed all through the pregnancy, good luck, because your base imprinting is life is stressful, life is stressful, life is stressful. I run on adrenaline. And we look at people who are like dopamine hooked with the games and the phones and whatever. And it's like, well, their brains are literally wired for dopamine and stress and cortisol and adrenaline. And I remember in my life going through that transition process of being like, hold on, I'm addicted to drama, pain, suffering. Can I find a way to be equally passionately addicted to pleasure, joy, compassion, peacefulness, right? And you're like, those are weird things to be addicted to. But actually, for the high intensity personality who needs to be like passionately engaged with things, that's a good shift. It's like, okay, let's see if we can shift that addiction over to like feeling really good in the body all the time and those somatic practices. Because if you're in that place where you're like, oh, I feel really like happy, alive, juicy, vibrant, pleasure in my body, I can feel that connection all the way up my spine and my juicy in my hips. Like, wow, that's a radically, like when you're in connection with that, is very obvious that you're not in fight or flight. It's very obvious that you're in a good place. So what have you mentioned tantrika. We've got that tantra path in common as well, which is probably why we've got this beautiful sister resonance. Yeah. Tell me more about that journey, exploring that for yourself and what you share with others now.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me go back to just talking about, you talked about the stress response from the maternal experience and imprint. And the research has shown that when mice were, when the pregnant mouse was put in a very stressful environment, so it would have been like a small box with no exits and deprived of any light and all that stuff, the baby mice were born with hugely elevated levels of cortisol. So it's like, for some people like that, like there's nothing you can do about that. So there's a sense of, I want to let people off the hook. Yeah. Like you were imprinted in your environment. You can't change that. You cannot change the past, but your biography does not need to be your biology. I mean, it is at a certain point, but then you get to say stop. So we talked about that at the beginning. Yeah. The other thing is when you talk about the juice of life, this is going to be a little bit different than, I know I love juice. It's so important. I want my clients, I want to feel the juice of life. I want to be fully present, alive all the time and feel that like literally coursing through my veins. And yet there is a belief in personal development that there's a goal, and the goal is happiness. You use the word joy. I'm going to use the word joy in a different context in a moment. So if we're not happy, there's something wrong with us. So juice is only available when we're happy and we can feel the energy moving through us. But what if juice is instead the definition of how you feel when you feel fully alive, no matter what is happening? So can you feel juicy when you are in grief? Can you feel the juice when you are in anger? Can you feel the juice when you are in disappointment? If we only want to feel happy, we are then creating the shadow disconnects that we have already been given in our lifetime. So part of the embodiment practices is to be willing to feel all that is without, remember my realignment protocol, and the L is to love and let it be. It's not about changing what is, it's about being fully present with what is. Let me give you an example. In the last 18 months, so you and I talked a couple of months after COVID started. At that point, the day COVID started, I was in Iceland with my kids. And the pandemic was declared, not the date started, but the day the pandemic was declared, we were in Iceland. We had to fly home as quickly as possible because we didn't know if we would be able to get flights, yada, yada. Got home, landed at home on a Monday, March 16th. And that was the last day that my husband stepped into our home. He left so that we could quarantine, and he never came back. Wow. And had no desire to want, and we had issues, and I still love him. And I think he's an amazing man. And my practice over the last 5 years has been going really deep into embodiment practices, and it made me become very real and very connected and very juicy and connected to life. And for someone who's not engaged in that kind of world, it can become very confrontational, and it could make them feel less than, and it created a disconnect. So I want to own that. First of all, it's not his fault. It's that our human journey had likely run its course. I don't know if it's forever, but it's for now. Yeah. So my husband left, my father died of COVID, my cat died, and about a couple of months later, my daughter moved 4,500 kilometers away. Oh, and so gosh. I was left at home in a puddle on the floor of tears. Initially, I managed really well because I had responsibilities. Like, I got to get everybody set up for success. We've got one child who's doing online learning. There's 3 of us. My daughter and her boyfriend were living there at the time. We're all working. We have a small house. How do we set up workstations? How do we make sure our Wi-Fi is working when 4 of us are pulling from it? And then, I've got animals to take care of and protecting everybody. So that kept me busy for a while. Mm-hmm. But then after a while, I couldn't get busy anymore. I found myself sleeping more, wanting to be quiet, going for really long walks, and just disengaging from life. Yeah. Yeah. And so I thankfully had the conscious awareness to say, okay, something is asking for my attention right here. This is the embodiment practice. Because some people would have said, let's go to the doctor and get something for depression.
Right. It's a pretty common response.
Which is so common. And my doctor actually, I did do a call with my doctor, and my doctor said, do you want something? I said, no, I've got this. Thank you. I know what I need to do. Part of it is I have my resources, my coach, my team, my community to be able to pull upon. So what I did is I literally woke up every morning. I recognized I was in deep grief. It wasn't just grief from that moment, although goodness knows there was enough in that moment to create grief, but there was that moment. And then there's this collective grief of COVID that I knew I was feeling. I would feel that come in and I could tell it's mine or it's not mine. And then there's this grief of my childhood and life in general. So what I did is I had a choice in that moment. Do I push it away and get busy, which I could do really, really easily. Yeah. And I think 95% of people do. Instead, what I did is I woke up every morning and I said to my grief, what do you need today? I treated it like my most endearing child. And I said, what do you need today? And some days it wanted to move. So my embodiment practice that day was to put on really gentle music, and very, very slow feminine movements, very, very slow, just moving as slowly as I could to the music, or sometimes no music. Sometimes what I felt coming up was like anger and rage. And so I would put on like just the raunchiest music, like stuff that I don't normally listen to. And I would just like dance like crazy, stomp, drum, go into my backyard. Thankfully, I lived on a conservation area. And I would go out there and I would just yell, because that's what I needed to do, because I knew that I couldn't just shove it back down. I needed to get it out of my body. So that was the practice. Some days I just needed to literally, I had no one else left at home except a 14-year-old, and I couldn't project onto him my needs. So I would just like hug myself. I would just touch myself. So we know to create safety in the body, we need touch, we need breath, we need movement. Those are the 3 conditions for embodiment for safety in the body. And so I would move, I would do deep breath work. Sometimes I would do gentle breath work. It just depended on what my body needed. And then I would just literally touch myself anywhere that my body was calling me to touch. And that was my embodiment practice in those days. And that lasted for like a year. But what happens is when you get in touch with your anger is a shadow character, by the way. I was not welcomed. Anger was not welcomed in my upbringing. So I didn't express anger for a long time. And when I learned to express anger in a healthy way, which means I released it, but not in the presence of the person who I was angry with. Yeah, I would go and release it. Super important, because we're not meant to yell at our significant others or our kids. Separate yourself from the situation, release it any way you need to. For me, movement is always really, really big. And when I learned to do that, what happens is anger is on the same spectrum as passion. So if you want to feel the juice of life, let's go back to that juice word. You need to feel your anger, because that's your passion for life. And I say to my clients, like, what are you angry enough about life that you want to create a difference? People who come to me and say they don't know their purpose, they don't know what they want to do with their life. What makes you angry enough that you're willing to step up and make a difference? You know, whether that's climate control or climate activism, whether that's parenting, conscious parenting, whether that's helping people to transform their lives and wake up in the world today. Like, what is it that you feel passionate about? You can't get passion without anger. They go together. And grief is on the same spectrum as yearning. So when you can touch into your grief and allow your heart to express that, eventually a portal opens up to, what do I really want in my life? And so for me, when I expressed my grief and allowed it to be without making it wrong, and by the way, our society does not welcome grief. Our society tells us You have 3 days you could take 3 days off work if someone really close to you dies, but you don't get any time off for divorce. You don't get any time off for loss of a pet, a child moving, like all those grief opportunities.
Yeah.
No, get back to work, right? So we don't know how to have a conversation around grief. But when we can give grief space and we can honor and love our grief, this is where we get to turn our pain into art.
Yeah.
And we can start to create what it is that we want to create in our lives. So it becomes a very creative expression of who we are. And I know that you're familiar with chakras. The Sacral Chakra is where our creativity sits. It's also where our felt sense lies. It's our feelings. It's our willingness to feel the juice, to feel the full spectrum. And it's not just happiness.
Mm-hmm.
So I have since gotten very clear about where I want to live. I ask myself, where will I feel nurtured? I've moved to the mountains on the west coast of BC from Toronto, not far from you. I've really created the life that I want to live. And I could not have done that had I not taken the journey to go through my grief. So grief opens up the portal to yearning. What do you long for in your life? Joy, for me, is the umbrella under which every emotional state can sit under. Joy is the umbrella. And this isn't my work. This is from Pema Chodron, who's a Buddhist nun. Joy is the umbrella that contains happiness and grief, anger, frustration, contentment, disappointment, all the various feeling states are under the umbrella of joy when you are willing to give presence to all of them. That's what joy is.
Sorrow is exquisite when you give yourself fully to it. Rage is exquisite when you give yourself fully to it. All of these emotions, if you're really in it. And if you keep practicing this work, eventually the presence and the joy at being able to express becomes greater than whatever the sort of the turbulent thing is, or at least the practice of it, right? The practice of being present with it sort of becomes like a muscle, and you're like, oh yeah. I can sub my brains out for an hour and a half, and I'm happy with it. Like, I'm glad I'm doing that. I'm grateful that this is happening. It's like, for me, this last week, I've had some difficulty falling asleep, late nights, and it's like, hey, I'm just going to go out onto the porch and curl up in a ball and cry for a bit. And that's what's needed. So that's what I'm going to do. And what's the content that comes through? Okay, we'll deepen into that content and allow it to really percolate out of the body and no longer be held in there.
Yeah. And that's releasing the tension, like tears.
Yeah.
My teachers called tears liquid sunshine.
Yeah.
It's releasing the tension from the body. And it doesn't even matter what the tension's about. Like, you don't even need to have a context, a narrative, a story.
No.
It's in there and it wants to come out. And so when we stop it, we stop the flow of life. Yeah. So joy is our life force. Juice is our life force, and it needs to contain all of it. Otherwise, we're closing off parts of ourselves. There's the shadows, closing off parts of ourselves. And the danger of that is that when we meet another in those particular parts that we're not owning, we will feel very judgmental. We will feel very unsafe. So it's important to be able to welcome home all parts of ourselves, to allow all of it to be expressed. And I love that you mentioned that you had a time frame, like an hour and a half to have a good cry, because when I first started doing this work, and we're going back now 24 years, when I started doing Gestalt therapy, which is very much about getting into the body and expressing, I was so afraid to turn on the faucet of my tears, because I literally thought, and I remember this is a conscious thought, I will never stop crying. If I open that portal, I will never close it again. And what I've learned is that, especially through the last 2 years, is that because I hadn't connected with my grief yet until literally a year and a half ago, I learned that I can turn it on, I can feel it, I can see the joy in it. I mean, it's a temple energy, it's water energy. It just wants to flow. It's not for me to stop it. But then I can also go make dinner. Or go make my coaching call. So it's like I could turn on the faucet, I can turn it off. The way one of my teachers says it is, the kink of our nervous system is shut down at that moment, and I can just unkink it. I can unwind, I can release, and then I can be okay. Yeah,
absolutely. When I first started getting into, tapping into that joy. I have this specific memory. It's like I was doing web design work. I had way too many projects on the go. I had 4 hours. My son was with a babysitter to go into the office and do the work. So it's very high pressure. Finances were tight. Everything was freaked out. I was single parenting and just super overwhelmed. Would open my email and want to start crying. And this one day I was like, well, what happens if I actually let myself start crying? And I was like, okay, the story goes, I don't have time. I don't have time to spend time crying. I have 4 hours I got to get all this shit done. Right. Mm-hmm. And so what I did that day that was radically different and that I'll always remember is I literally just set a timer on my phone. I said, okay, 5 minutes, give it all you got, honey. And I literally crawled under the desk, which is what I wanted to do. I was like, I just want to crawl under the desk and cry. There's too much for me to do. Literally lay on the floor in the fetal position and just sobbed as hard as I could. It was a shared co-working space, but I just let myself be in that feeling. And turns out I was done crying before the timer went off 5 minutes. Yeah. It was I really, and when we really allow ourselves to hit bottom, you can hover at 5% sad for your whole life if you want. You can hover at 80% sad for your whole life, but really to be at 100%, to be at fully rock bottom with that feeling, to fully feel it is really hard to stay there. Yeah. Because all that it wants is for you to hit, touch that bottom. And then there you go, you got it. And then once you got it, it's like a rebound. It's like going underwater and coming back up. You're, oh, okay. And then you come back to some sort of equilibrium. And so just setting a timer, setting a container and allowing yourself to do that and being able to, and then knowing you can snap yourself out of it and go back to ignoring it and stuffing it down and not being in that. You can go back to that, but give yourself some minutes a day, give yourself some time every day to really tap into what's going on and what needs to happen.
And I want to caution, if you find yourself still under that desk a week later, please get some help, right? Because there's a fine line between feeling like you are consciously in that state and then letting the state consume you. And, if you're not able to function, you're not able to work, you're not able to see the joy in what you're going through, which means to fully feel it. It's not that you're going to feel happy in that moment, but one of the expressions that my teacher uses is you learn to feel good feeling bad. Mm-hmm. I actually really enjoyed my experience with grief. I did. I just it felt so relieving when I took the time to experience it. And right now where I'm living, I don't have a conservation backyard to go out and just yell at the river. Yeah. So what I do when I feel this tension coming in my body, and it's just there's a release, again, I could just take a breath. I could do a spiritual bypass. I could just say, life is great, peace, love, and harmony, push it back down. But I know that if it's coming up because it needs to come out. Yeah. I don't even care what it's about. It doesn't matter. I feel it coming. So you know what I do? I have an annual pass for the gondola in my community in Squamish. I go up the gondola and there's no cameras, no audio, nobody. And I just yell
in the gondola.
I do. And then I get to the top. It's okay, where am I going to go for a hike today? Or there's a yoga class ready for me at that point. But I don't want to go to yoga with that energy. And because then I'm just stuffing it back down. I call that the spiritual bypass. Just want to feel good. We started this conversation, around happiness. It is a myth in personal development that if I don't feel good, there's something wrong with me, because there's beauty and value in every emotional state. And when we can attend to the sensations in the body, all of a sudden the labels, angry, sad, whatever, it doesn't matter. You just attend to the sensations, which is the language of the body. And there's so much and so much learning, personal learning. That's true personal development. And then what do I need to be in relationship with this experience that I'm having? That's the embodiment practice. What movement do I need? What touch do I need? What breath do I need? What stillness do I need? Right.
Yeah. And I really appreciate that you brought up that piece about not getting caught in it, because there was a period of time in my life where I felt like, in the past, I'd always felt okay, I can dive into this and I can dive back out. And there was a period of about a year, 2017, 18, somewhere in there, where I didn't feel like I was in control of it. It felt like it would take me over and I couldn't get back out of it. And that's a really scary place to be in. It's a really it's really terrifying to be like, oh, I can't get out of this. If I start crying, I'll be crying for days. And I really want to, like, the solution for me in that moment was asking other people for support, letting go of that 1980s, like, I can do it all, I'm a brave, independent woman, and asking for support from the people around me, and also nutrition. Right? Because if we get into these cycles and we get into these patterns and the brain's literally like wiring and firing into these challenging states, it can wire and fire and learn that this is what we should be doing, training our brain every time. And so with the joygasm rituals of alchemy, emotional alchemy, it's like we always return back to presence. We always return back to peacefulness. We always re-trigger a positive emotional state on the far side of that expression, whatever that is, so that we're training the body. Okay, you can feel intense, challenging emotions, but you're also at the end of that intense, challenging emotion, there's a catharsis, there's a release, there's a relaxation, there's a beauty that comes from that. We reconnect with presence, we reconnect with our personal power and our strength, because it's no fun to get stuck into it. The point is not to be like, oh, I'm out of touch with my sadness. Now I need to get in touch with my sadness, which means I need to be crying every day all the time. That's not the point. The point is we've got years and years, decades, millennia of like unprocessed ancestral trauma sitting on our shoulders. And if we can learn how to let that out 5 minutes at a time, 20 minutes at a time, whatever, ride to the gondola, up and back again, whatever your personal ritual is, right? Like I used to stick my head underwater and just scream. Like we were living on the beach. I just like push myself underwater and just like scream. And then I'd be like, oh, now get me back up to the surface of the water, right? There's that release. Like, oh, I do want to be here. I do want to live. I do want to be happy, right? I still want to be in this. And it's super important that the end of whatever that expression ritual has something upbeat, something joyful, something caring. I mean, it doesn't even need to be upbeat or joyful.
I think just contentment, peaceful, right? Just contentment, I think, is the word that comes for me. It's like, okay, I've released what I need to release right now. And in this moment, I'm present and I'm relaxed in my body. If there's not a relaxation state, if we bring it back to the body, if the body's not relaxed at the end of it, it means it's not done. There's something else that needs to come through. And realistically, it may not be in that moment, because maybe you do have to make that call, or make the, kids are coming home from school or whatever. But if you recognize it, it's not done for now. And what I do is when I run, I call healing heart circles, where I bring people together in community and we share whatever's present and alive. And sometimes it might, when I was doing it live, sometimes there might be like a physical expression of something that could be really big and could bring up stuff for other people. And we do it with the idea that when one person recreates or heals something, it heals the circle. So we all become the beneficiaries of that person doing their work. And at the end of the circles, when we close, we always say, am I complete or incomplete? And out. And complete meaning my nervous system is relaxed, my body's relaxed, and I'm okay. Incomplete, I can still be okay, because again, if I'm not, then I'm judging what I'm going through as wrong. So incomplete just means, my nervous system has been opened up a little bit. There's activation, and I'm just going to be with that. We're not reopening the circle. We're not going into therapy. We're not doing trauma release. We're just acknowledging that there's something that's opened up in me. And for now, I'm just going to recognize that. I don't have to fix it. I don't have to change it. But my nervous system is not fully relaxed right now. And that's okay too. That's okay too, right?
Yeah. There's one other piece I wanted to touch on there, which is, you mentioned spiritual bypass. I think the spiritual bypass, but there's also mental bypass. I went through a period of 6 months to a year, something like that, where I was totally comfortable with expressing my emotions and being in the emotions. But along with that, instead of full embodiment, instead of really being connected to my body and the sensations, I would go, oh, I'm feeling this because my grandma. Oh, I'm feeling this because my grandpa. Oh, I'm feeling this because of my ancestors. Oh, right. So then all of a sudden, instead of being fully in my body, present with whatever the sensation is happening, I was in my head rationalizing my intellectual understanding of why I was having this experience as a way to avoid it. And this is probably more common than I realized, but it took me, some amount of time. It took me a good amount of time to realize that this was what I was doing, and that what I needed to do was actually just feel it not attached to a story, because the story is literally just like, oh, it's their fault. Oh, it's their fault. Oh, it's their fault. Rather than being, wow, you had such a challenging experience. I'm so sorry. I feel the resonance of that in my body because I'm physically related to you and made from your cells. And now we can bring it all to loving peace.
Yes.
Now we can bring it to like, okay, it's okay that all of those things happen and I'm here and I'm coherent or incoherent, but I'm willing to be with it. I'm willing to express it. And that was a game changer for me in terms of expression, right? It's like really.
And what I do is I often will say, you know, sweetheart, what do you need? To myself, what do you need right now? And I feel like there's, you know, a lot of very traditional therapy and personal development work is really good at identifying what are the triggers, where did that come from, and then okay, I recognize that, but it doesn't release it from the body. So we're going to go back to embodiment work. The body holds everything. The body holds everything. Louise Hay has taught us that, and I mean Rumi, the Sufi poet Rumi, mid-century Sufi poet Rumi talked about it. Carl Jung talked about it. We know that the body holds the score. And so we can intellectualize and talk about it all we want. And, you know, I don't want to throw him under the bus, but that was my relationship with my husband, my current husband, who has been separated for 2 years almost now, is that he intellectualized everything, but was unwilling to feel. And so for someone who was so felt sense and had worked intentionally to be felt sense, I wanted to meet him at that feeling point. I didn't want to talk. I didn't want my body to meet his brain. I wanted my body to meet his body.
Yeah.
And so if you are on this journey of like deep embodiment work, it's possible that you're going to find yourself confronted with people who are only on the mind path. And it doesn't make them wrong. I don't want to make him wrong. That's his journey. It just was not right for me anymore.
Yeah.
That's all I could say about that, is it wasn't right for me. And if I was to blame, and what I say to people is, and I'm sure you've heard this, every time you blame and you point a finger, there are 3 more pointing back at you. So that's where the work has to be. Yes. It's like, back at me, back at me. So, you know, we can blame people all we want. We can rationalize all we want. The mind is so brilliant that it will look for all the ways to affirm its beliefs. Always, always. And yet the body is even smarter. And the nervous system is the communication channel between the brain and the body. We don't want to live in just one and not the other. Of course not. But the nervous system, if it is kinked, if it has tension, if it's holding from the body, then it will never fully be expressed. One will never fully be expressed in this lifetime. We need to have that union of, this is yoga, mind, body, and spirit. How do we bring union into it? How do we honor all parts of ourselves and then be able to relate from that place where we are so deeply connected and intimate with all parts of ourselves?
Yeah. And it's so just like the compassion, right? Like that blame is like, you know, and there's a lot of polarization going on in the world right now, 2021. There's a lot of like, you're doing this, you're doing that, it's your fault. And it's like, how much of that is people being in anxiety, fear, stress, and being unwilling or incapable or untrained to be able to look back at themselves and go, I'm feeling very uncomfortable about this. What can I do to take care of myself right now so that I feel better?
And let's change the better to safety so that I feel safe.
Safety. Yeah.
Because I think safety is what's really triggering a lot of people right now. This feeling of my body's not safe, and we're constantly running this low-lying tension.
Yeah.
And then, you know, one person posts something and it just erupts into a volcano of, you know, just separation and duality. There's just enough of that in the world. So I feel like we have a responsibility to just recognize that in ourselves, and don't worry about other people right now. Just look at where you hold your own judgments and separations about yourself. Bring compassion into your experience. Honor your inner child that's maybe been wounded and maybe played out in ways that didn't show the best part of you. But they didn't know any different. But now you get to decide. And the more we can do the embodiment practices, which is just really tune in. What is your? That becomes an opportunity to allow life inform you about how you're doing and how you can respond. Otherwise, if we're not connected to that part of ourselves, we just react.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And reaction is rarely pleasant, right? It's the reaction is often judgmental, violent, angry.
Yeah. So that's the difference
like
I use between, the difference between reaction and response. Response comes from consciousness, reaction comes from defensiveness. So if we're in defense for any reason, and there's a lot of reasons today, if we're coming from a place of defense, what we share will not usually be our want to do right now. What do I need to share? What do I need to share from my heart? What does my body need to feel safe? What is my body feeling? Period. That's the word that I use, is how do I give it loving presence? I have a chapter coming in a few weeks. You and I are co-authors for the Ignite publications, and there's my third book coming out in a few weeks. And the chapter is called, and it's a beautiful compilation. Les Brown is one of the co-authors and co-contributors to this book. So it's been just a really exciting journey. And it really talks about how if we can bring loving presence to whatever you're experiencing, and then replace with your partner, your child, your neighbor who you disagree with, the world, Facebook, Instagram, whatever, loving presence to it. You get to take away the judgment. When you take away the judgment, right? Take away the judgment, you see how everybody is just playing out based on their imprint of reality. I always say people are doing the best they can given their model of reality and their capacity to deal with life in this moment. So then we can start to release our judgments. When we release the judgments, we can bring loving presence. We can send love, we can be love, we can send peace. And it's not that we're going to agree. The mind is not going to agree, but we can see that we're all on a soul journey together. That's why we're here. There's a really great book, and if you haven't read it, you need to read it to your son. It's called The Soul and the Sun by Neil Donald Walsh. Okay. Yeah. And it's a beautiful story. I actually read it to my adult clients and my teacher trainers. When I do circles, when I run yoga teacher trainers, I read this book to them because we all are souls having this human journey. And along our journey, there are going to be people who have, let's victimize, done things to us. But if we recognize that they're also souls having a journey, and that hurt people until they know that they don't have to anymore, we can send forgiveness, we can send compassion, we can recognize that everything happened for the evolution of our soul, even if on a human level we can't understand it. And maybe on a human level we don't want to understand it. But on a soul level, what has been your greatest teachers in your life? What has given you the most courage, strength, forgiveness, capacity to soften, relax, receive? It wouldn't come if you had an easy life. Right? So it's The Soul and the Sun. It's a beautiful story about how the kind soul, who's the soul's friend, offers to come and be the person in a human form that gives him the opportunity to practice forgiveness. So who is your spiritual guru? Who is that person that is inviting you to deeply practice forgiveness? And maybe it's yourself. Maybe you need to forgive yourself first for however you showed up, whatever you've done. We all mess up. We're just human, but we are also beautiful, soulful beings here to create something bigger than any one of us could ever imagine. But we need to be fully present and embodied and loving and kind and non-judgmental to be able to let that unfold.
Absolutely. So beautiful. Yeah. It's a really interesting, beautiful time to be on the planet with so many awakening beings, so many awakened beings. And it'll be really fascinating to see how this next 20 years turns, thinking about time in a bigger scale than this month, next month, what's happening this winter. So I'm like, there's some really fascinating stuff brewing and a lot of people waking up. And if we look at the last 10 years, that 2010, 2012 window and how many people were like, whoosh, how many people went through that wake up journey during that time, and how many more hundreds of millions of people are in that journey now. Think about where, my personal journey was, your personal journey was 10 years ago, and where we are now. It's like, people are going on that journey. Maybe they get the accelerated version because the pressure cooker's up. See what happens, right? Really beautiful possibilities.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I always say that we have a choice. We have a choice to take a chance to create a change. And so, again, I said earlier, nothing changes. And if you are filling your mind with all the negativity of the world, it's going to be really hard for your body to feel safe and your nervous system to relax. So make a choice, everything changes. Like notice when you're not breathing. And breathing is, we get breathed every day. We don't have to work on it, but conscious, deliberate breathing practice is one of the ways that you can go into your body. And so when you start doing it on a daily basis, like before I get up every morning, I take 5 deep breaths and I say 3 thank yous. That's my gratitude practice. And it doesn't matter what state I'm in, that's my gratitude practice. Thank you, thank you, thank you. 5 deep breaths. And then I do my realignment practice. What's going on in my body right now? What's calling my attention? And how can I love that part of myself, even if it's pain? Because remember, pain times resistance equals suffering. So here's the word of advice for your listeners. Pain times freedom. Pain times presence equals freedom. We all have pain in our past. Can we bring loving presence to this moment? Wrap the past with gratitude for whatever you have learned from it, and then be able to create a future that is so much brighter, lighter, joy-filled, not just for you, but for everybody that you get to be around. Don't start the morning with your news. That's just not healthy for your body, right? Get up, feel your body, lie in your bed, feel your body, be in your breath, be in your present moment, and then choose where you put your attention, what you want to support. So I'm just going to plug a little bit here. I'm going to be starting a show and it's called the Divine Spirit Network. And my show is going to be called Realign to Thrive, and like a 12-episode show sometime in the new year. And the intention is to help bring some conscious light into the world. And we haven't done production. I don't really even know what I'm going to be talking about. And I know that I will be interviewing people. So stay tuned. Elena might be on the show. And, how do we bring consciousness into a world that's really fractured right now? How do we heal those fractures?
Absolutely. Beautiful. On that topic, what else do you have that's coming up in terms of, are you doing online programs? You got one-on-one coaching? What does that world look like if people want to connect with you and find out more about your work?
Yeah, thank you for that opportunity. So my program is called Realign to Thrive, and I believe we all have the capacity to realign to thrive and create the life that we desire in our world today. And not only do we have the capacity and the desire, but I'm going to say we have the responsibility. And we have the responsibility because there are young eyes watching. Like, I know my kids have gotten an imprint of what it's like to be a really courageous mom by moving here. And your son sees that imprint for the choices that you've made. If you go to my website, dianalockett.com, I do one-on-one coaching, I do group coaching, I do yoga teacher trainings, and I also have online programs. So I have a self-study program. So I have different versions. Self-study program that you can purchase. And then there's also the group coaching, and then more intimate and more accelerated is the one-on-one coaching. I also do quite a bit of podcasts and speaking, summits, virtual speaking right now. And I'm continuing to write. So we met at Ignite Publications. I have 2 books published. Third one's coming out in 5 weeks. And then my solo book, I really am committed to getting it done this year. I don't know how you're doing with yours, but it's like I put it away and then I brought it back, and I'm inspired to write after this talk today. So I'll get back to it.
Yeah.
How are you doing with your book?
I got really inspired after we did that series with JB, and I wrote out probably 3/4 of it. And I got through all the crappy shit stuff, all the past. And I got to the part where I had to write the nice, happy stuff about my current life. And I just froze on it. I got really freaked out about sharing. And it's interesting because you said you were like, I should pick that back up again. And in this last week, I'm like, you know what? I've got a baby coming. If I want that book to come out, it's going to come out before the baby, not after the baby. Otherwise, I got to wait another 5 years to do that, and maybe longer if we're doing more. And so it's back on the list, and I go, oh, the only thing I have to do, I've already written and edited a lot of the crappy, tough stuff. Because my excuse was, I don't want to keep rehashing how challenging it is. I just want to be in the joy of how beautiful my life is now. And it's like, oh, great. I get to go back and look at that book and write the beautiful, happy, joyful chapters. I get to accelerate that a little bit more because I get to include like conscious conception in some of that journey now. And what that's like versus, unconscious conception, which would be my previous, or semi-conscious. I don't know. It's like, as I like to say, like the first one was like as conscious as I knew how to be in a very unconscious life, right?
Remembering that everybody does the best they can given their model of reality of the world, right?
Exactly.
So no blame, you just move forward with more awareness.
Yeah. So that does feel like it'll be coming forward, and I've done the work to go, oh, I can share things that are beautiful and happy in my life and not have them come crashing down afterwards, which is part of the patterning that had stopped me from moving forward with that, to be like, oh, like, I got as far as the sort of the trauma. I'm like, I can talk about trauma all I want. No fear there. But talking about life being nice, I don't know. Like that's where the judgment and the bullying or whatever was in a pattern and is no longer in a pattern. People are just being great and beautiful and celebratory now. So, hey, let's see what happens and bring it forth. And
and I think that's really important to do that. And I'll just give you really quickly my example of when I wrote the last book, which is called Ignite the Hunger in You with Les Brown. I wrote it back in May, and my ending of that chapter was the life that I'm living now. So there was a sense that I got to co-create and manifest. And manifestation isn't just, I want to live here and do nothing about it. Of course, I had to do all the right steps to get here. I had to sell my house. I had to get a moving truck. I had to pack up. I had to tell my husband that our son and I are moving, 40 to go into it. And yet I read the book now, the chapter, as it's not even released yet. And I have co-created that reality of joy, and joy being presence to everything and relaxation. Like this, I'm so relaxed here.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really important for us to keep writing on these positive notes with the focus on joy and juice and relaxation and safety. One, because it's, I think for you, with an audience that you have, you get to give an imprint to other women of what's possible.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? So you are writing, I'm just going to give you a second of coaching here. You're writing for everybody else. You're not writing for you, right? Right, with your reader in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Who I used to be, right? The me I used to be, the women who are still stuck in abusive relationships, the women who are still single momming. And, it's like I worked my way out of that. I did that work. I remember being at a healing circle, and I had left my abusive relationship, and this woman had been in hers. She was still in hers. It was 30 years later. And I was like, God, I only did 2 years of that. And it effed me up pretty bad, but I'm on my recovery journey. I was like, she's still stuck there. So that's a huge inspiration for writing that book, is like, right. If I can make it more obvious, the mistakes that I made that they're making, if I can make it more obvious, the challenges in that journey, and where we have to just continue to prioritize ourselves and our well-being and our children's well-being, so that we don't keep making those mistakes over and over again. And I think I talked to you about this a little bit. So choose your own adventure. So if you keep making the choices, you keep going back to that like rape scene, or you keep going back to that, like, the sobbing fist fight or whatever it might be. And by the 7th time through, you just go like, what happens if I choose the other path? Right. Like, I'm tired of reading this chapter. And it's like, well, in real life, we get little slightly different faces, we get slightly different real like world situations, but in a book, it's like it gets really obvious really fast. Like, didn't I already read this? It's like, yes, you've already read this. Yeah, but you made the choice that ended you right back up there. So don't do that again next time. Let's do something a bit different. So
I can't wait to read your book.
It's going to come out, I promise.
I know it will. Yeah. Oh, it's been so lovely talking with you.
Yes, absolutely. Before we wrap up completely for today, if you had words of wisdom for women who are starting their somatic awareness body journey of healing, what would those words of wisdom be?
So one of the phrases I use a lot is breathe and everything changes. Like notice when you're not breathing. And breathing is, I mean, we get breathed every day. We don't have to work on it, but conscious, deliberate breathing practice is one of the ways that you can go into your body. And so when you start doing it on a daily basis, like before I get up every morning, I take 5 deep breaths and I say 3 thank yous. That's my gratitude practice. And it doesn't matter what state I'm in, that's my gratitude practice. Thank you, thank you, thank you. 5 deep breaths. And then I do my realignment practice. What's going on in my body right now? What's calling my attention? And how can I love that part of myself, even if it's pain? Because remember, pain times resistance equals suffering. So here's the word of advice for your listeners. Pain times freedom. Sorry, pain times presence equals freedom. We all have pain in our past. Can we bring loving presence to this moment? Wrap the past with gratitude for whatever you have learned from it, and then be able to create a future that is so much brighter, lighter, joy-filled, not just for you, but for everybody that you get to be around.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Diana. It's been a wonderfully uplifting conversation. I'm so grateful to be in your presence and in your world again in this.
Well, that was awesome. Thank you so much for listening all the way to the end.
How easily can you imagine that this experience is integrated already deeply into every cell of your being in such a way that you will begin to notice that you have already been operating from this new behavior for a while, and that it was simply a matter of noticing how much you've already been doing this. You may choose to feel that this moment is the moment that completely and utterly into your body. Or in the days and weeks ahead, getting curious about how fully and completely this experience has transformed your life, realizing that you are at complete choice to choose how you would like to integrate this information into every cell of your being.
Thank you so much for being a part of the Joygasmic Life podcast, and I am so grateful to have you here and be a part of it. If you haven't already, head over to joygasm.me to check out our Joygasmic Birth Blueprint ebook and course, which give you all of the information that you need to become a Joygasmic mama, whether you are postpartum or whether you're expecting your first baby. This course absolutely has tips and tricks for you that will help prepare you for birth, prepare you for the birth of your next child, and prepare you for peaceful and joygasmic mothering on the other side. So absolutely, the way that we do one thing is the way that we do everything. And so by utilizing and beginning to build a practice of joygasmic alchemy, you will absolutely become a better mother and hold space, as I am and as many, many women are, for the enlightenment of the planet. We do that first by working on ourselves and then offering that support and that enlightened nature within ourselves to our families. And then from there, it ripples out. So if you haven't already checked that out, go check that out now. Again, it's joygasm.me. We've also got courses on rescuing your relationship, bulletproof mom, how to be able to handle even the most intense toddler or special needs child later on in life, as well as a multitude of new courses that are coming out. We're absolutely grateful to get to have you as a part of that. And remember, anyone who participates in the funding of the podcast absolutely gets a membership access, which allows you to access the bonus features, the ends of some of our episodes, exercises from our guests, as well as featured free content from them. So super glad to have all of you who are a part of that already here. And thank you so much for being a part of the Joygasmic Life family. If I could leave you with only one tip for how to be an orgasmic, joygasmic mama in this world, the invite would be to really step into and embody the knowledge that you are actually here for a reason, and that reason is to be an enlightened being for your family. They chose you for a reason. They chose you on this consciousness journey for a reason. And you absolutely have the tools and skills to be able to do this. If you're struggling, please reach out. I am more than happy to help people rewire what's going on in their brain, create a new story, and create a more powerful experience so you can be the kind of mama for your kids that you really have dreamed of. You absolutely deserve it, and your children absolutely deserve it. I look forward to getting to know you more, and I look forward to co-creating through the membership content. Have a beautiful day, and we'll see you on the next podcast.